Hello and welcome to episode 230. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. You are listening to one of our premium episodes, and these are recorded for and made available to only to our premium subscribers. That's you. Thank you so much for your support. In our last interview, Bill Dow outlined some of the 12 steps that he recommends we need to go through in order to build a new PMO. But what's next? What do you actually have to think of as you are trying to implement and then grow your PMO? To determine what you have to do, we are going to talk about the PMO decision chart, metrics and measurements, PMO audits, performance tracking, and more. Well then, this time I'm definitely not going to sing and pretend that I'm Olivia Newton-John. Just enjoy the interview, yes?
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Bill Dow, speaker and author of the Tactical Guide for Building a PMO.
Hello, Bill, and thank you for coming back onto the program and continuing our discussion of building a PMO by moving into implementing and growing the PMO. Hi.
Hi. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Sure. So, during the first interview, we covered some very important steps, 12 of them, in building a PMO. Please take a moment, recap those steps for us again, will you?
Sure. Yeah. So 12 steps. So the step 1 is to start with a plan. Step 2 is to obtain executive support. Step 3 is to create the PMO staples. Step 4 is select the 4 Ps of your PMO. Step 5 is select your PMO model. Step 6 is select your PMO maturity model. Step 7 is obtain your PMO resources. Step 8 is select your PMO training. Step 9 is implement your PMO methodologies. Step 10 is select your PMO reporting. Step 11 is select your PMO tools and processes. And finally, step 12 is your PMO is complete. Time to celebrate. The one thing to consider is they are in order and they do build upon one another. So you'll want to handle them and do them in order, and you won't want to bounce around too much.
Right. And also as a reminder for everybody, these 12 steps are available as a Microsoft project file from Bill's website. And there's a link again going to be in the show notes to this. So those were the 12 steps for building a PMO. I'd like to focus on implementing and the PMO. And how, after the PMO managers go through your 12 steps, then do they implement the PMO? Tell me about implementing the PMO, Bill.
So when you think about implementing your PMO, you really will create a series of artifacts through the build phase that you've collected along the way. So in my book, what I do is I document 3 main artifacts that PMO managers will use when implementing a PMO. The first thing they're going to use is management direction. That may be an email, that may be a PowerPoint, whatever that is, but your management's going to say, I want this or I want that when you implement your PMO. I also talked about the PMO build decision, and that's where you documented along the way your decisions of what you were going to build. And then finally, your PMO recommendation report. We talked about that as well, is when you're analyzing an existing PMO, you're going to want a set of recommendations. So these are the 3 main artifacts that you will use when building a PMO.
Right. And the build decision chart, we talked about that in the last interview, right? That's the document there where you go out and you discuss what the direction is going to be for your PMO, correct?
Yes, that's it exactly. You literally will document, you'll say, I want a supportive PMO, I want portfolio management, I want these processes, I want this training. And so this is a document that you're going to create along the way. You're going to get buy-in along the way, but it's certainly going to help you and be one of the main things that you will draw upon when you go and you start implementing your PMO.
It all sounds extremely simple, this whole thing. Are you basically saying that you take the 12 steps that we talked about during the building of the PMO, and now you just implement them?
Yeah, I do. It is simple. I mean, I've done it a couple times, and simple is relative, of course, right? But taking the 12 steps, taking the processes that I've defined in your book, in the book here, you will certainly give you the steps that you need to build a PMO, especially with that PMO recommendation report, right? These are the things that you've documented when you've analyzed it. You've said, this is the things that are going right. These are the things going wrong. And so I would take that as a major contributor as well in your implementation process.
Right. And I didn't mean to trivialize this, but, the book is 468 pages long. So there's just more to this.
Right.
All right. So we're done. We assessed the PMO. We wrote our recommendation report. We built it. We implemented it. Now what? Time to party?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people don't do that, right? I said it earlier. I said building a PMO is a huge project, and when you finish a project, you roll into production, you finish the bridge, whatever you're doing, you do need to celebrate. And so part of it is just celebrating all the work you've done, but also as a PMO manager, you really do need to celebrate and boost morale. And once a year, even at the minimum, once a year, you really show the appreciation to your employees and do celebrate it, because it is a massive effort to run a PMO, deliver projects on time, under budget, and so on and so on. So I think it's a great morale booster and something very, very important to do.
All right. So you've had your party. It's the next morning. You've taken 2 aspirin for your headache and the hangover. What's the next thing that people are going to do in building a PMO?
Yeah, so like you said, the PMO is building right now. The next thing to focus on is performance reporting. Performance reporting is a critical component for any PMO manager, and it's really the only way to understand how well your projects and programs are executing. It's literally when a team says they can do something in 5 days and they take 10, or they say they can do something in 3 days and they take 6, or whatever it is, performance reporting is really the next critical step to see how well the teams are performing and then make the tweaks where necessary.
Okay, that makes sense. PMO metrics, PMO measurements, and tracking, very important. It's definitely a complicated process and one that people can spend months and months during which they develop this. Do you have any tricks in starting to collect metrics for us?
I do. I certainly do. The first thing I would highly recommend is to hire a Six Sigma black belt. You, as a PMO manager, you're not necessarily going to be a metrics or a measurement expert, but the Six Sigma black belts are certainly are. And so if you can bring them in for a short period of time to really help you get up and running, that would be a huge start. Secondly, remember when we talked about creating the PMO maturity model earlier? Mm-hmm. In the model, we specifically had categories, and we talked about things like regulatory compliance or Sarbanes-Oxley, and we talked about the various categories. These are the categories that you will use to start the basis of your metrics and your measurements. So what I've suggested is I really created in chapter 14 of my book, I created a 3-step process with the help of a Six Sigma expert, to be honest. And so what I say is step 1 is grab your PMO model. Step 2 is pull out your maturity categories from that model, and we roughly 3 to 4 categories for each model. And what you'll do is you'll create your KPIs from that category. With your KPIs, you'll capture things like the purpose, the baseline number, the target number, the unit of measure, any frequency, any leading and lagging indicators, and then reporting methods. Once you've done that, you have yourself a KPI for the PMO that can be measured. It's actually pretty simple.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds pretty simple, these steps. And give me some more details here. What's some metrics that PMO managers that are just starting out can create immediately?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I get that all the time. Some of the metrics you can do just to get yourself going, under category, you can say organization and people. Your KPI can be something like the percentage of project managers to be PMP certified. That was one. You could have another one. You could have PMO category methodology, and your KPI can be percentage of programs and projects that are using a standard program or project methodology. just two that you could get going right away with.
Right. You also mentioned performance tracking. Let's go a little into that. What are some simple PMO performance tracking methods that you would recommend?
From a PMO perspective, I think there's several performance tracking. I would say schedule performance tracking. That's something that can be done right away. If you're using Microsoft Project or a scheduling tool, schedule performance tracking is very easily done. Quality metrics is another thing you can do right away. How well are we tracking? What kind of quality do we have on our project? Cost performance tracking is also very easy to track. So schedule, cost, quality, these are just some of the three performance trackings that you can do pretty easily on when you're driving your PMO.
One of the hot topics today in PMO space, audits, auditing, even though for most people this is like a red flag and it's a dreaded topic. Still, do you believe it's important, and what do you think the process looks like?
Yeah, when you're running certain types of PMO, then auditing across those areas is going to be important. So if you're running a supportive PMO, for example, auditing may not be that important. But if you're running a directive or a controlling PMO, yeah, auditing is going to be very important. I've ran a couple of PMOs where I've used auditing around the methodology completeness. So how well were program and project managers following their specific methodologies? The process was simple. It basically totaled the score. So did they do a communication plan? Did they have a project schedule? And they'd have a 1 or a 0 for a score. And basically the amount of artifacts equaled X score. And they would just they would self-audit, they give themselves a 1 or a 0. And basically if they didn't do an audit or they didn't do an artifact, that may be okay for that type of project. But what it's really doing is it's really getting the project managers and the program managers and portfolio managers really comfortable with the artifacts that they need to produce on their projects. And it really helps them really become more mature and help them drive. And it also gives you a feeling for what artifacts are actually being used on projects today and what artifacts can be missed.
Right.
So it's a
what I hate about auditing in this sense is filling in artifacts for the audit's purpose. That's right. It. You're just filling it in because the audit requires it. And I've always had a really tough time with just, working in environments like this, because for me, an artifact doesn't have to be filled in because it is mandatory. It has to be filled in because it helps your project. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, it's a great point. But there's employees, and I've had them work for me. There's employees that need to know exactly what to do.
Right.
Okay. And so there's some employees saying, okay, what do I do in initiation? What do I do in planning? Well, if you give them the audit spreadsheet, it's going to allow them to tick off the things that they need to do. And so you're really using that audit, and I know audit's a bad term, I get that.
Yes.
Using that in that tool for a couple different purposes. And some, frankly, are, hey, what do I need to do? What do I need to do in this phase or that phase? So it's worked. It's simple. It's worked for me. I really think it's a pretty strong process.
Right. Well, let's leave audit. Let's move on to PMO resources, because in your 12 steps, you talk about hiring PMO resources, and I'm absolutely sure there's a very strong process that you can offer. But tell me about ongoing capability assessment of your PMO employees. Have you created any kind of process, or how do you handle assessing the capabilities of your current PMO employees?
Yeah. I've created the PMO capability assessment process. It's really simple. It's a 3-step process. Step 1 is where you assess the needs and identify the skill gaps of your PMO employees. So if you have a project manager and a program manager role, maybe there's a skill gap there, right? Maybe they're a great project manager, but they don't really get the sense of what a program manager does. And so you're assessing their needs for each of the employees. And then what you'll do is you'll go to step 2, which is PMO employees learn and update their skills based on their gaps. So we'll train them up. We'll provide a mentor, formal training, on-the-job trainings, but we'll really hone in and focus on those gaps. And then step 3, the PMO employee skills are updated. where applicable, and then they move on and they take on larger and more impacting programs and projects in the organization. So it's this constant looking of gaps, updating their skills, and allowing them to take on more and more. And it's not really a complicated process, but it's a process that PMO managers can follow as a framework to really allow them to get the most out of their employees and allow them to take on more and more challenging programs and projects.
Let's move on to PMO change agents and the importance that change management plays in a PMO perspective. Do you think that change agents have to be PMO managers, or do you see any similarities between the two?
That's a great question. It's a great one from a PMO perspective. No, I don't think a change agent needs to be a PMO manager. I don't, but I do think there are some similarities between the two roles. I think the similarities are they focus on the vision, the future state, and the outcome. They approach work holistically as a system. They develop consensus and participant alignment. They proactively achieve desired results. So I think there is some alignment and some similarities there, but I don't think that they need to be a change agent. Or they don't need to be a PMO manager. Mm-hmm. Anyone can be.
Right. So from your perspective, final question here. What is the most important factor that gets often overlooked in the day-to-day business of running a PMO that our listeners should begin paying more attention to tomorrow?
Yeah, from my perspective, you have to look at the amount of process that project managers are dealing with and really balance that process for the level and the size of the project. If you're a project managing a small, say a 3-week IT application, that's a really small project. You can't really expect them to do everything in the PMBOK. It's just not feasible. But if you're managing, say, a bridge or a building or something, you are going to expect more processes. So it's the balance of how much process you apply to the type and the size of the project. I think day-to-day PMO managers overlook how much process they're applying, and with balancing the project managers managing 2 to 3, 4 projects at one time. So it's a balance of their workload and the processes that they're applying.
Right. But in order to do that, of course, you need to first of all have built a scalable methodology, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Once again, the book is called The Tactical Guide for Building PMOs. No, for building a PMO, pardon me. The author is William Dow, and it is 468 pages long. That's an enormous length. That's PMBOK Guide 4th version, roughly the size of it. How long did it take you to write the book, Bill?
It basically took 19 months to write the book and get it.
19 months, wow.
It took about 4 or 5 months of actually compiling it, because you did mention earlier it's self-published, so it required editing and so on and so on. So it was a pretty long process.
All right, The Tactical Guide for Building a PMO. Available on Amazon, and if you go to our website in the show notes, you will find a link to the book, as well as a link to Bill's website where you can download that Microsoft project file that has the 12 steps. Thanks again for coming on to the program here today, Bill, and continuing our PMO discussion with implementing and growing the PMO. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
And that was our discussion on the tactical approach to implementing and growing a PMO with Bill Dow. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager and you want to become PMP or PMI ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcasts, the PM Prepcast and the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. On government projects, we never punish errors, only their disclosure. Until next time.